Hi, I'm Dr. Matthew Davids from Dana-Farber Cancer Institute in Boston, and I'm the co-chair of the Medical Advisory Board for the CLL Society. I'm here with my colleague and friend, Dr. Weirda. I'll let him introduce himself.
Hi, I'm Bill Weirda from the MD Anderson Cancer Center. I lead the program for CLL at MD Anderson.
Great, thanks, Bill. So another exciting development at this year's ASH meeting was more mature data on the CAR T product Liso-cel. I know you were very heavily involved with this work, so can you please summarize the abstract, please?
So this was abstract 330. It was a follow-up presentation that Tanya Siddiqui, my colleague, made on the Transcend 004 trial. The Transcend 004 trial is an early development trial of Liso-cel, which is a CD19 CAR T product for patients with relapsed and refractory CLL. There were multiple cohorts of patients enrolled on the Transcend study, one of which was treatment with monotherapy, meaning Liso-cel alone. Another was a cohort of patients treated with Liso-cel plus ibrutinib. And then there was a third smaller cohort of patients treated with Liso-cel plus venetoclax. But these data are more mature data, particularly from the monotherapy or Liso-cel alone. And these were all previously treated patients. And the focus recently has been on the cohort of patients who have failed both a BTK inhibitor and a BCL2 inhibitor, particularly venetoclax, with the objective of showing activity and efficacy in that group of patients who really don't have standard of care options available to them subsequent to their having been treated with BTK and BCL2 inhibitors. So demonstrating activity and efficacy in that group of patients who have what we refer to as an unmet clinical need, and also demonstrating tolerability. The Transcend trial and the monotherapy arm, we studied two different dose levels of Liso-cel, a 50 million cell per dose and 100 million cell per dose. And the analysis that we focused on recently was to look at the activity, particularly for the 100 million cell dose, and particularly, again, in patients who were what we refer to as double refractory. There were 50 patients who were double refractory and had received the 100 million cell dose level. And the outcomes that we focused on were those among the 50 patients in that subgroup. Overall, the response rate was 44%, and the complete remission rate was 20%. Now, that's, I believe, modest activity, but we have to remember that it's a population of patients who really don't have much in the way of treatment options available to them. There was durability to these patients who responded, meaning that their response lasted for a reasonable amount of time. The patients, in fact, who achieved a complete remission were all MRD undetectable, and none of those patients have yet progressed. And the follow-up is about 2 years average follow-up. The patients who had achieved a partial remission, and there were 12 of those patients, their median progression-free survival, or generally average time of disease control, was about 2 years. So we're seeing good and deep remissions. All of the patients who achieved a complete remission and partial remission achieved undetectable MRD status in the bone marrow. And so I think that speaks to the activity of this treatment, particularly to clear blood and bone marrow disease. And also, it demonstrates that there is, again, durability and lasting responses to the treatment. We do know that this treatment is currently under investigation and review by the FDA. Hopefully, we will have some discussions and deliberation on that over the next few months, and potentially approval by the FDA for patients who are refractory. The other comment I should add is in regard to the toxicity and tolerability of this treatment. There's two side effects that we pay particular attention to with this treatment. One is what's referred to as cytokine release syndrome. These are flu-like symptoms that come about because the cells are expanding and reacting against the leukemia. And this typical symptoms are flu-like symptoms, but they can be severe, like low blood pressure and very high fevers. Most of the patients experience some level of cytokine release syndrome. In fact, 85% of patients had CRS symptoms. I think the important point, though, is that only 8% had more severe cytokine release syndrome, which was grade 3. There were no patients who had grade 4, which is an even higher level of cytokine release. So while patients do have cytokine release, most of them are mild, and typically it includes fever. The other toxicity that we pay close attention to is neurotoxicity. This is sort of a confusion state. Rarely patients can have seizure, and it's a concerning side effect, and fortunately it was low in this trial. 45% of patients were reported as having had some neurologic symptoms, and 18% had a grade 3 neurologic toxicity, which it's about 1 in 5 patients who are having a more notable neurotoxicity, and it's one of the side effects and toxicities that we really grapple with this treatment, and would like to work on strategies to reduce and minimize that. But in general, there was 1% with grade 4 neurologic toxicity, but in general, these resolved and were transient.
It's very exciting. It's a great summary, and it is exciting to imagine that this may become available for CLL patients if it is approved by the FDA this year. So I guess with that in mind, sort of any final thoughts about sort of what the place would be for Liso-cel if it is approved in CLL?
Well, I believe it will be. It's going to be a little bit different than for our oral drugs in terms of availability, and that is because it has to be given at a center of excellence, because of the need to understand and manage the side effect and toxicity profile and the logistics of getting it to patients. There's a lot more control by insurance companies over who has approval to get it, and I believe that we will see a more constrained approval of this treatment for patients, and particularly in regard to it being given within the constraints of the approval of the FDA. So I do anticipate, at least early on, we'll see it being given to patients who are double refractory. We would like to move it earlier in treatment because we think it will be better tolerated and be more effective in patients who are not as refractory to all the treatments that we have. And hopefully we'll have more clinical trial data to support that, and we'll be able eventually to move it up earlier in treatment. And it is like stem cell transplant, one of the treatments particularly that we have discussed as a potentially curative strategy for patients. So I believe it's very important. We still have work to do in terms of improving the efficacy and the tolerability and reducing the toxicity profile. And I think that will come in part by moving it up early, and then also in part by our understanding and working on strategies to optimize the treatment. But I'm very optimistic about this as an available treatment for our patients.
Yeah, so am I. It's really, really exciting data. So thank you so much for sharing that with CLL patients, and we look forward to seeing future data and maybe even an approval for Liso-cel later this year.
Great. Thank you.
Thanks.